going to go ahead and introduce our wonderful speakers for tonight. So we're joined by Holly Thompson. She's the author of the book we'll be discussing, Listening to Trees, George Nakashima Woodworker, as well as many other works, such as The Wakama Gatherers and Orchards, which was the Orchards, which was the winner of the Asian Pacific American Award for Literature. She's a graduate of the NYU Creative Writing Program and a longtime resident of Japan. She writes and translates poetry, fiction, and nonfiction for children, teens, and adults, and teaches creative writing in Japan, the US, and places in between. You can find more information about her and her work at her website, which I've just put into the chat. Later in the evening, we'll also be hearing from Asako Katsura, who is an Ishibashi assistant curator of Japanese art at the Museum of Fine Arts right here in Boston. She completed her master's degree at Sophia University in Tokyo, doctorate at the Visual Studies program at the University of California, Irvine. She's previously worked as an intern at the Noguchi Museum in Long Island, New York, and participated in several exhibition projects, including Chiura Obata, American Modern at the Okayama Prefectural Museum, and Our Ecology Towards a Planetary Living at the Mori Museum in Tokyo as well. Just a final reminder for people to change their Zoom name to whatever name they use to register to this program with. And then I did want to give a brief introduction to the subject of tonight's program, just for anyone who may not already be familiar with George Nakashima. Excuse me. Growing up in the Pacific Northwest, George Nakashima began a love story with trees that grew throughout his remarkable life as an architect, designer, and woodworker. During World War II, George and his wife Marion and their baby endured incarceration in Minidoka prison camp, where he drew comfort from the discipline of woodworking. Once free, George dedicated the rest of his life to crafting elegant furniture from fallen or discarded trees, giving fresh purpose and dignity to the wood and promoting a more peaceful world. Today, his pieces are displayed in museums and greatly coveted by many collectors, some of whom I know are here tonight. His studio, now helmed by his daughter Mira, is still active in New Hope, Pennsylvania. I'm going to go ahead and pass it to Holly to start talking about some of these things I just mentioned. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. And it is such an honor to be here with Japan Society Boston and MFA Boston. And they've been really critical for the work that I do. I'm going to start my slideshow. And we'll be talking tonight about Listening to Trees, George Nakashima Woodworker, which is my newest book. And these are some of the other books that I've worked on, 3 verse novels. Most of my work relates to Japan, where I've lived for 25 years in the latest stint and 3 years earlier before that. Just a shout out to Japan Society Boston for being one of the first places where I read from my first novel. So very much honored to be back. George Nakashima was someone whose work I can't really place when I first learned about him, when I had some awareness of who he was. But once you've known his work, you will recognize it easily if you are in museums, if you're in galleries. My father always loved wood, and he was cutting wood, heating with wood, crafting with wood, sculpting, making bird models, made some furniture. The spoons in the upper area are the things he made late in his life when he lost some of his use of his hands. So I was growing up very much aware of wood furniture and paying attention. And then very late in his life, coming back from Japan to visit home now and then, I saw this book on his shelf, and I hadn't recalled seeing it before, and he loved paging through it. He didn't have, he wasn't very much able to talk at that point, but he loved just turning the pages. And so together we would look through this, and then I started reading it more closely. And this was when I started thinking, I think I need to dig deeper and find out more. Of course, I lived in New York for a number of years between my Japan times. And the Met in New York has these gorgeous pieces on display. I'm not sure exactly when they were first displayed, if I actually was seeing them there at that time. But I did take Japanese lessons at the Japan Society of New York, and they have beautiful Nakashima works there. So he was definitely in the air, and was certainly quite a prominent figure in the 80s before he passed away. And then it was in Japan when I went down to Takamatsu in Shikoku, and I was being taken around by Kathy Hirano, a very prominent translator of particularly children's literature and novels. But she was also translating for many of the arts organizations down in Shikoku. And she said, you know, you really should think about writing a picture book about George Nakashima. And this was in, I think it was 2010. And I had so many things on my plate that I could not consider this for some time. But then I began to research and dug deeper and deeper, and I was convinced that that George was someone I hoped that children would be able to read about. So in 2015, I went to George Nakashima Woodworkers, and spoke with Mira and Kevin, and was able to get permission from both of them, which was hugely meaningful to me. And they were so enthusiastic and eager to see George's life in a children's book. And this gorgeous table was there drying after being refinished when I was there. So I was able to really peer up close at this incredible work. And then, of course, go into the lumber sheds and so on and so forth. And so, of course, then I dove into the research and gathered, of course, any books that there were, but also dug into any video clips and any recordings that there were, listened to his voice on recording, listened to everything I could about from Mira, and archival material kept coming in as over the years as I was working on this. There were new pieces, new discoveries of his Boy Scout, what he made in Boy Scouts and so forth. So it was always evolving. So then after some years of research, then I had all this material. And for a children's book, I think, you need to figure out, what are you going to focus on? What are you going to share? You can't just throw everything in. And children's books are typically, picture books are typically 32 pages or 40 pages or 48. And so if you want to be able to sell it to a publisher, it probably should be 32 or 40 and no more. So how do you fit George into just the number of page spreads for a 32-page book, and which things are important? So going through these, was the Boy Scouts experience, was that going to be critical? The hiking he did, his architecture degrees. He moved to Japan in the 30s to live in his grandmother's old home. That seemed to be a formative experience. He worked for architect Antonin Raymond, and Junzō Yoshimura also worked for him, and there were many prominent architects who were gathered there at that one one workplace, and this was quite an influential period. But then he moved to India to work on a project there for Antonin and Raymond, and ended up joining the ashram and staying there. Then he moves back to Japan. Then he meets Marion, marries her after they return to the US. Daughter Mira is born. And then, as many of you probably know, in 1942, the family was incarcerated at Minidoka. And this was a horrific experience, and probably the one light for them in this, for George, was meeting the Issei carpenter Gentaro Kenneth Hikogawa, who was a first generation Issei carpenter. And for George, this was an opportunity in horrific circumstances to be able to learn more about traditional Japanese carpentry, as they were making just ordinary stools and other simple furniture. And it was Antonin Raymond, the architect he'd worked for in Japan, who had moved to Pennsylvania and sponsored the Nakashimas to move east, stay in their farmhouse, and gradually, as the war ended, George was able then to take on work outside of within the farm, and began their own life as a woodworking family. And then there are more major issues, and more major events in his life. So what do you do in a children's book? What do you choose? Also, some questions to ask is, what exact age group is this for? How young is this? How old a reader are we thinking of? I like to think of picture books as books for all ages. That the picture book is a format. It's not saying this is for children only. So that was how I went into this project. And then what form? Do I write it in prose? Do I do it as a long poem? Is it 32 pages? Would an editor go for a 40-page book? And all of these are unknowns. So I drafted, went through more photographs and archival materials, and shifted my thinking for which events were most important, and so forth. Stared at photographs for little details that might become part of the text. And eventually my manuscript, I had a solid draft, but as you can see on the left here, it was in prose mostly, with the illustration notes. And I was a little bit frustrated with it. It felt a little flat and didn't seem to have George's voice. So I began playing with haibun, which is haiku plus prose. And haibun was made most popular by Matsuo Basho, and during his meanderings, especially up in northern Japan, he wrote in the form of haibun, these prose pieces that were interspersed with or ended with a haiku. And the haiku and the prose complement each other, expand each other. And that was something that I thought, given George's journeys and travels and journeys in his creative life, I thought that might be effective. So this was kind of my type of model for what I was doing, and read many modern haibun as well as bashos and others to try to help me think, how could I do this just in a children's book without crowding it? And the haibun version was sold to Neil Porter Books. And so the scheduled publication date was 2023. Of course, with picture books, that doesn't always happen. And in this case, there were so many details that we had to work out. You may or may not know that it is not the writer's the writer who chooses the illustrator is chosen after the work is accepted. And so it was the editor who selected Toshiki Nakamura. And so he was working with the art director on the illustrations. So typically the illustrator and the author don't meet at all during the creative process. We exchanged a couple of emails. But I had to find more archival material for Toshiki to work with, and I had to be able to share information that would go into the back matter, which I was thrilled how much back matter the publishers of this book were willing to include. The art director, the editor were totally on board. Also, it was important to me to be able to convey to the art director and illustrator that George did not work alone. There were many people working with him during his life and are still working, and it is now called Nakashima Woodworkers, and there are many people involved in making one of these pieces. And just, you know, sort of making different trips down to Pennsylvania from Japan. It was a bit of a challenge to do this, and trying to immerse myself in his place of living and working, and trying to appreciate and understand the theories behind his furniture. And Mira was just amazing through this whole process, has supported the idea from the very beginning. And here we are when I visited with my editor, Neil Porter, who was eager to get inside the area and be able to see for himself so that he could understand, you know, how this would really piece together. And from the get-go, he knew that he wanted to put a full spread with Mira's voice in the opening, and that was really important to the book. So more and more time there at Nakashima Woodworkers. If you ever have a chance to go and take a tour there, occasionally they're offering tours, and it's a really amazing experience. So went back with the art director, gathering reference materials specifically for the back matter, which had timeline, photos, and different woodworking techniques that George used, and definitions, and so forth. So lots of another year's work of work delayed the publication. So in addition to the story, all of these are included, including, you know, George's woodworking process, the growth of a tree. This is a book that's also for children. So how does a tree grow? What are these terms that George uses? And a note about haibun form, and note from me, and photos. And here we are when it's all been done and sent to the printers, and celebrating at a meetup in New York City. That was an exhibition of work by George and by Mira at this gallery. And then recently, this summer, I was able to go back to where this idea began, to Sakura Seisakusho, the workshop that is the only workshop in the world that George Nakashima worked with and licensed them to produce some of his designs. And so I was able to go back there with Kathy Hirano, the translator, and meet with Michiko Nagami, the daughter-in-law of Kenichi Nagami, who began this workshop, was one of the people who started the workshop. And so the book birthday was in October, and I'm going to read you the first few spreads of the book, and give you a sense of how I hear it, and how I think of the text, the prose and the haibun working together. So, Listening to Trees, George Nakashima, Woodworker. And the first spread is this beautiful piece by Mira Nakashima. A boy catches his breath at the timberline. George Nakashima felt at home in the woods, among firs that speared the sky and stunted evergreens clinging to mountain tops. A pack, a pair of shoes, worn completely through. He loved hiking trails in the Cascade Range and Olympic Mountains, climbing from pass to pass, always eager for the next vista. Forests spread out below, a vast sea of trees. Admirer of trees, George studied forestry, then switched to architecture. But in summers, he worked the railroads, staying close to the wilderness he loved. Sunlight on tatami, doors open to winter. As a young man, George boarded a ship to Japan, land of his ancestors, to work for an American architect in Tokyo. He stayed in his mother's family home, a sturdy old farmhouse with beams and posts of fine Zelkova wood. Sometimes George traveled out of the city to visit forests and catch the fragrance of blooms. Two friends on a veranda, quiet cups of tea. With an architect friend, he toured temples, shrines, and tea houses. He saw power in simplicity and beauty in unfinished wood. And at work, he drew plans, mixing traditional with modern, concrete with wood. Breeze of oleander, silence calms the mind. One job sent George to India to build a dormitory at an ashram. George took charge of design and construction, even crafting the chairs, benches, and tables from teak wood. For 2 years, George lived a simple life, with daily tasks, meditation, and meals in silence. He was content. But war was building in Asia, and George knew he needed to return to Seattle. Identical rings, handmade of silver, for a life together. In Tokyo, George met Japanese-American teacher Marion, and after they'd each safely returned to the US, they married. George considered a career in architecture, but decided he'd rather become a furniture maker, crafting fine pieces in wood, controlling every step himself. So I'm stopping there, and I think at this point, is Asako going to dive in?
All right. My name is Asako Katsura, and I am a Nishibashi Assistant Curator for Japanese Art of the Museum of Fine Arts, Boston. I'm very excited to talk to you tonight about George Nakashima's furniture collection of the MFA Boston. I start my talk with this basic question of why was George Nakashima a woodworker? It is possible to call him a designer, furniture maker, or artist, but Nakashima called himself a woodworker. So I just focus on what does that mean today. So Nakashima gave us a hint by saying this one time, quote, "My relationship to furniture and construction is basically my dialogue with a tree, with a complete and psychic empathy," end quote. Today, I will talk about how Nakashima respected characteristics of wooden materials, such as the natural form of a tree and wood grains in his furniture, and recognize his work as something to be lived with, rather than exhibited as fine art objects, which defined his artistic identity as a woodworker. To contextualize Nakashima's work, I focus on the three artistic responses to the rapid industrialization and urbanization between the late 1800s to early 1900s today. These are arts and crafts movement in Europe and the US, folk art movement in Japan, and shaker furniture. All these three contexts, to name only a few, resonate with Nakashima's work ethic and aesthetics as a woodworker, because they all resisted how mass-produced, machine-made objects standardized people's living environments. One of the most defining characteristics of Nakashima furniture is what is called organic naturalism. This means that Nakashima utilized the natural form of a tree and wood grains in his furniture, such as chairs, benches, and tables, instead of designing them with strict geometric forms and heavily painted surfaces. This bench on the right is from 1979 and in the collection of the MFA Boston, which precisely exemplifies his organic naturalism. The shape of the seat is not perfectly rectangular nor circular, simply because that was not what the original wood this bench was made of looked like. The seat shows fluid outlines with an indentation right here on the left edge, which other furniture makers might just smooth out. Instead of hiding a small crack of wood, Nakashima emphasized the crack by putting what is called a butterfly joint. He also left a grain of wood visible both on the side and surface of the sheet, backrest, and legs. Nakashima designed this type of bench individually around the shape, graining, and cutting of a single slab. Placement of back and legs is tailored to each specific piece. He was a woodworker because he tailored his furniture based on his careful observation of what kind of wood he worked with, instead of trying to impose his design on the material. Another important characteristic of Nakashima furniture is how it blurs the boundary of art and everyday life. Nakashima often said that his furniture should not be considered overly precious and that it was meant to be lived with. He valued the virtues of the wear and tear left by everyday living on furniture, which he called, and this is my favorite term, I think is very sweet, Kevinizing. Because his youngest son, Kevin, as a little boy, tended to damage their own furniture, and he appreciated that. Nakashima's attention to build a bridge between art and everyday life demonstrates his lifelong dedication to enhance the quality of our living environments by resolving the modern conflicts between work and home, humans and nature, designers and craftsmen, and shops and factories that had been accelerated by a rapid industrialization since the late 1800s. His recognition of himself as a woodworker situated him in between these different categories. His home was his studio. He worked between humans and nature. He was a designer, but also a craftsman. He sold what he made. To honor Nakashima's appreciation of furniture to be lived with, MFA is exhibiting his bench in the sculpture gallery for the visitors to sit down. This is part of our Please Be Seated project, in which we are placing several chairs and benches made by artists across the galleries for the visitors to sit down and rest. Instead of being exhibited behind a protective glass, Nakashima's bench is for the visitors to experience and Kevinize. Nakashima's self-recognition as a woodworker came from his respect for natural forms and patterns of wood and his preference of his furniture having the wear and tear left by everyday living, here I would like to introduce three artistic responses to modernism, particularly a rapid industrialization, rise of consumer culture, and urbanization that resonates with Nakashima's practice. Arts and crafts movement, Japanese folk art movement, and shaker furniture. So first of all, arts and crafts movement is the origin of artistic resistance against mass-produced objects that occurred in the mid-19th century in England. It was a reformist attitude against the poor design and quality of machine-made objects and restoration movement of hand craftsmanship. This movement was promoted by William Morris, who emphasized the importance of the ideals of the Middle Ages, when each craftsman designed and produced an object by hand instead of a machine. Although Nakashima was born after the era of the arts and crafts movement in England, his practice was in line with what William Morris believed in. Arts and crafts movement was promoted in the US around the end of the 1800s by artists such as an American architect, Frank Lloyd Wright, who belonged to the Chicago Arts and Crafts Society. Unlike their European predecessors, Wright accepted machines enthusiastically, but he acknowledged technical and aesthetic merits of the raw materials over designers' personal aesthetic considerations, which resonates with Nakashima's belief. Wright sympathized with English arts and crafts movement, call for simplicity and honest construction. Nakashima worked for one of Wright's assistants, a Czech-American architect, Antonin Raymond, in his architectural firm in Tokyo between 1934 to 1936. Frank Lloyd Wright was the one who invited Raymond to Tokyo in 1920 to work on the Imperial Hotel, which was one of the most iconic buildings in Japan in pre-war period. George Nakashima started his career as an architect, and he got his master's degree in architecture in MIT in 1930. Wright, Raymond, and Nakashima shared their respect for the natural quality of raw materials, and all of them were interested in designing the space in its entirety by designing furniture. The wooden furniture that Raymond designed for his own house and for other commissions inspired Nakashima's interest in the natural quality of wood, because Raymond preferred using wood in its natural state. The second important movement against modernism that resonates with Nakashima's practice is folk art movement in Japan. In 1925, Japanese art critic and thinker Yanagi Muneyoshi invented the word mingei, literally means art of common people, therefore folk art, and started Mingei movement to promote the study of folk art and the appreciation of the beauty of handcrafted everyday objects in Korea and in Japan. Yanagi also appreciated the unification of functionality and beauty in crafts. Yanagi opened a museum dedicated to folk art in Tokyo in 1936, when Nakashima was working with Raymond in Japan. Nakashima's furniture echoes the simplicity of the designs of Japanese folk art, and Nakashima also shared Yanagi's sense of opposition against egocentrism, as exemplified by modern Japanese folk artists such as ceramicist Hamada Shoji and Kawai Kanjiro, who appreciated the beauty of anonymous designs. Nakashima disdained the idea of signing works, as he thought it wrongly ego-centered. He only started signing his works in the 1980s because of the increasing number of imitations of his works on the market that made his customers ask him to sign and acknowledge his authentic works. Regarding the influence of Japanese art on Nakashima, it is also important that he learned traditional Japanese woodworking skills from a Japanese carpenter, Gentaro Kenneth Hikogawa, whom he became friends with at the Minidoka camp where he was incarcerated with his family during World War II. The final important example against machine-made objects that influenced Nakashima is shaker furniture. As many of you might know, the United Society of Believers in Christ's Second Appearing, commonly known as the Shakers, conducted the largest and most successful communal experiment in American history. While today there is only one active Shaker community in Maine, at its height during the mid-19th century, they had more than 6,000 members spread across 18 communities from Maine to Kentucky. Shaker communities were largely self-sufficient. Members grew their own food, constructed their own buildings, and manufactured their own tools and household furnishings. To support their communities, they sold surplus food and goods to outsiders. Furniture made by the Shakers is renowned for its minimalist design and rich quality. They used local American woods like pine, maple, and cherry. Shaker furniture rejected excessive ornament because it ostensibly encouraged a single pride. Nakashima sometimes called himself a Japanese Shaker because he found many similarities between his concept of craftsmanship and Shaker craftsmanship. A well-known book called Shaker Furniture was found in Nakashima's studio library. The one on the right is Nakashima's konoi chair, and the one on the left is a Shaker chair from the late 1800s. Nakashima's chair on the right is a chair with cantilevered seat over two legs. Cantilever is this structure right here. It's a structural element in architecture extending horizontally with no support at one end. This structure is practical for sliding on a carpeted surface. These chairs experience a low incidence of breakage compared to the more conventional four-legged chairs. If we compare Nakashima's chair on the right with Shaker chair on the left, we could find many visual similarities. First of all, overall simplicity. Ornamentation is limited to the manifestation of natural wood grain. Shaker's use of tiger and bird's eye wood patterns looks similar to Nakashima's too. Second, Nakashima did not sign his work, at least in the early days. And third, Nakashima wanted his piece to be treated as everyday functional objects, not as if they were precious possessions. This too parallels a Shaker as well as Mingei principle that the source of beauty in an object is in its usefulness. And finally, similarities of joinery. Exposed butterfly joints were used by European, Japanese, and Shaker woodworkers and have become Nakashima's trademarks. Nakashima used it as a decorative accent, highlighting the cracks, as well as an important structural device which prevents further splits in the wood. Nakashima considered Shaker furniture the best of American country work, and he believed that the reason for this was that the Shakers do their work as an act of reverence and not from a desire for profit. Like the bench that I showed you a few minutes ago, he called this line of furniture konoid line. Between 1957 to 1961, Nakashima furniture transitioned from the basic rectangular cut-edge cabinets, benches, and end tables like this chair on the left, designed in 1944, to maximize the fluid natural tree forms into furniture on the right. And he called this new type of furniture konoid line after the name of his konoid studio in New Hope, Pennsylvania. To go back to the first question of why Nakashima was a woodworker, we could say that this konoid line kind of defined his artistic identity as a woodworker. Nakashima respected the natural form of a tree, exposed its grains and cracks, and left his furniture for the users to interact with. Nakashima belongs to the first generation of studio furniture makers post-World War II, who returned to the principles of traditional furniture making as a woodworker. Nakashima's work aimed at providing a lifestyle that was alternative to the rising corporate culture in which mass-produced factory furniture could standardize people's way of living. This is my talk. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you so much, Asako. Now, we hope to hear a little bit more from our speakers in our Q&A portion. So at this point, either in the chat, or you're also welcome to raise your hand, or either through Zoom or actually raise your hand and voice any comments or questions or stories. I know quite a few of our audience today has visited the studio in Pennsylvania or owned some of his pieces. We're also actually honored to be joined by Mira Nakashima herself, who I see in the Zoom. So not to put you on the spot, but if you'd like to make any comments, you're welcome to as well. But thank you so much to the speakers.
Yeah, thank you. And we look forward to questions. And thank you so much, Asako, for that incredibly detailed and really informative explanation of George Nakashima's work and the woodworking that's done at Nakashima Woodworkers now.
I'm gonna start going through a couple of these questions in the chat. Melody asks, are pieces available today from current woodworkers? And this is for, Holly, Asako, Mira, anyone who'd like to answer.
I can start, and Mira, you're welcome to follow up. But yes, definitely, the Nakashima Woodworkers is very much making furniture now and very active.
One of our members, Jack, has shared a lovely article from the MFA regarding some of those benches, and I know so they're currently being displayed, if I'm correct, at the MFA.
Yeah. So the thing is, please everybody come if you're in the Boston area, because we rotate the things exhibited in the gallery to. We need to put some objects in storage and take care of them at some point. So now is the time for you to come and sit down on his chair. It's possible that we have to put them in the storage for a while for collection care. So yeah, please come.
Kenneth asks, Holly mentioned several times something like end pages. If you won't mind sharing, I wonder if you still have some of the images, Holly,
Yep.
of the matter that you referenced, just to give a little taste of what that looks like.
Actually, I'm going to just do that by holding up the book, as I don't have all the detailed pages in here, but it's very unusual to have as many end pages as this, as I mentioned. So after the end spread of the book, there's a note from me, and then there is this very full timeline, which deep gratitude to Mira for fact checking everything and fact checking again and again and again, and sharing these photographs to be included as well. So this is a very full timeline. We also have the growth of a tree section, which is based on Nakashima's writings on this and his diagrams. Woodworking process, thanks to very much to Mira and Nakashima Woodworkers for guiding this, and definitions of shibui, wabi, and sabi, and these gorgeous photographs of the actual works. And at the back, a little bit about haibun and the haibun form. Of course, a bibliography, so you can check out even more resources. So I hope that's helpful.
Another question from Kenneth, live edge furniture, where the outside of the tree is left intact, is very popular. Is Nakashima credited with this invention?
We cannot say that, like, we cannot really determine who invented this style, but there is actually another very important furniture designer, Charlotte Perriland. She is a French architect and designer, about the same generation. I think she's like 2 years probably older than Nakashima, but the same generation of furniture designer. She was making free edge furniture too. I think they knew each other's work because she was in Japan too. I think around the period when Nakashima was there, I think Mira-san knows about this way better than I do, of course. But this type of like biomorphism, like a natural edge, was some artists were pursuing during this time period. But Nakashima was definitely one of the most successful designer because he could also explain the rationale behind it. You know, he had his own philosophy behind it, or you know, it also resonates with his work ethic and his belief that the trees breathe and trees lives. He tries to make the most out of this natural shape of a tree. So we cannot say who invented this style, but he was definitely one of the most successful designer to apply this type of style.
And I would do this myself, Asako, but I don't know how you would spell it, but someone
I can spell the name of the designer.
name of the French designer. I see Seth has a hand up, so I'll jump to Seth for any comments or questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate both the presenters for an inspiring and beautiful presentation. I'm a huge Nakashima furniture fan. So one comment and one question. The comment is, I just have a vivid memory of going to the MFA a few years ago with the intention of just seeing the Japanese art on display, and found both the Nakashima bench and a Sam Maloof bench there for us to sit on. It was so delightful and unexpected, and a real act of trust on the part of the MFA curators to allow us, the public, to sit in those works of art. So thank you very much for that decision. The question is for Holly. This is not something I know much about, but the haibun I've seen and thinking about Basho's accounts, usually the prose part comes first and then it's followed by the poem. And the pieces you read, it seemed like it was mostly the other way around. So I'm just curious to hear your thoughts on the order and how that affects the sort of way the words land on the reader.
Yeah, thank you. Great question. So with haibun, with modern haibun, sometimes it's, you know, the poem might come first, the poem might come later, there might be several poems. So you'll see different poets doing this in different ways. So it wasn't my idea to put the haiku in any particular place on the spread. That was really a design choice, and I think they opted to keep it fairly consistent as to where it would be, but you probably noticed that sometimes I'll read the prose first and then jump up to the haiku. And I think when you're actually holding the book and reading it, your eye might jump in different ways, and that's fine. I see it as you can read it in whichever order. Yeah, thank you.
Sharing just a few more things in the chat here. Joyce had the opportunity to visit in Shikoku, the Japanese partner to Mr. Nakashima. What was so interesting was the community of incredible artists who seemed to have inspired each other, including Nakashima, his partner in Japan, as well as Noguchi. I've heard great things about the museum as well, so it's a little out of the way, but if you have a chance, I would recommend anyone to visit as well. One question from Roberto. Did Nakashima design or build bookshelves? Why not? Or if he did, how are they?
We do. We build all different kinds of shelves and storage units, as well as tables and chairs.
Thank
And
you.
cupboards and more and more. Beautiful, beautiful.
Also, I couldn't figure out how to turn off my mute, but when you're talking about the free edge furniture, Charlotte Perriand was indeed a contemporary of my father, and I've always wondered whether they met when they were in Tokyo. But Charlotte's and most of the other designers of the time called free form or free edge furniture it was a man-made free edge. I think my father may have been one of the first people to utilize the natural free edge. And I think he was inspired by Japanese architecture because it's used in various ways in Japan. But I was also inspired by economic necessity. In the beginning, he couldn't afford to buy the good straight edge lumber, so he bought the cutoffs from the lumber yard and put them to use because he decided they were beautiful. The as Soetsu Yanagi said, the perfection of imperfection was, yeah, and he also called himself a rag picker of lumber. But those butterflies that he learned how to do in Japan were really important to hold things together, as well as the dovetails. So it's working with nature and natural forms, which everybody does now. I mean, there's so many woodworkers who do that now, but I think back in the 40s, Dad said people thought he was crazy or something in the beginning, and then when they figured out that there was this new aesthetic using the natural forms of wood, they paid extra for the knots and the holes and the cracks and the butterflies. But in the beginning, they thought he was a little odd.
So
Thank you
wonderful.
so much for that. That's so
Yeah.
exciting to know.
Yes.
I learned a lot. Thank you so much.
Melody asks, are there internships available for students studying furniture woodworkers, things like that?
Not at our shop. We're very much focused on filling orders for clients, and we take our time to teach people how to do woodworking. Dad never took apprentices because he said he would teach them what he knew as quickly as possible, and they'd stay for a little while and they figured they knew everything they needed to know to go out and compete with him. So he never approved of that. But we do take, sometimes we take summer apprentices in. It doesn't mean that they'll be doing woodworking. Sometimes they're just pulling weeds or something. That in the Frank Lloyd Wright tradition. But we know that we will not survive unless we keep introducing younger and younger people and passing the tradition on to them. So we take them on, but we hope they will stay with us for a good long period of time, because it takes a long time to learn what we do.
I think it's a wonderful presentation. I really appreciate the comments from Holly and Asako, and especially from Mira, my former classmate years and years and years ago. You know, George Nakashima's work reflects very profoundly, I think, his relationship with Japan and what he learned from Japan and what he taught in Japan. The Japan connection is really clear and wonderful, but I've always been curious about India. He spent a number of years in the Sri Aurobindo ashram in India. And did he write about that, or can one of you speak a little bit about what he was searching for in India and what he brought back from India?
Well, I think he was searching, as all young people do, for a meaning to life, or a raison d'être, or raison à faire, he said. And he found that through hard work at the ashram, and through discipline, and through the learning of the Sri Aurobindo teachings. And one of those most important teaching was the sublimation of ego, and your devotion to a higher being for whatever you do. That artistic endeavor is not for your own ego, but it is for a great power. And I think that's what he brought back with him, and that's what's going his entire.
Thank you.
Nice to see you, Peter.
Great to see you again. It's been too long.
Jack asks in the comments, they mentioned rare tours that may be available at the studio. If you have any insight into how you can find out when you might be open to visit.
We used to have a Saturday afternoon open house. My parents were alive, and there was no fee, there was no appointment necessary. And we were so overwhelmed with too many visitors. We're not really set up, with navigable parking space and all that thing before COVID. So when the COVID shutdown happened, we were actually very relieved. So there wasn't as, and then when we reopened after COVID, we decided we needed to control the traffic better than we had before COVID. And so now we only take up, you can only tour the property by appointment or by signing up for a tour. And the tours for this year are finished. We don't start again, I don't think, until March or April. And they go till November. So when we open the tour registration, I think it's in January or February, you can sign up and pay money and make your reservation. Otherwise, if you want to order furniture, you're welcome to make an appointment and come almost any time.
Thank you. I put the link to the Nakashima Woodworkers website in the chat for anyone who would like to check out the website. It is 7:03, so I think we'll take any final comments or questions or comments from the speakers and Mira as well, and then unfortunately have to wrap up for this evening.
I'd just like to say, I urge people to go to the Nakashima Woodworkers website. It's a beautiful site, and if you dig deep in there, there are incredible photographs and quotes and lots of information. So do visit the site. Thank you so much, Mira. It's such a joy to have you here with us and sharing all of this. So important.
I'm sorry I got a little late. I just wanted to thank you for including all of your material at the end of the book. I was surprised to find that. I thought it was just a children's book and this is a story, then it was over. But you've got all this information at the end, which I wasn't expecting at all. Thank you very much for including that, because it's not just for kids, it's for adults as well.
Yeah, very fortunate to have an editor who believes that picture books are for a wider age range than is often typical, and for including so much back matter. I'm really grateful.
Yeah.
Grateful to Mira for fact checking everything.
Well, I was surprised because I thought it was just a children's book and it didn't matter if it was accurate. You really checked the facts.
Yep.
Thank you everyone so much to Holly, Asako, Mira, and everyone else who joined us this evening. I hope you can check out the book, check out the studio, check out more about his life and do your own kind of research journey. But yes, YouTube recording will be shared to all the registrants in case you want to check back. And from Japan Society of Boston, thank you for taking part in our last event of the year and for your support throughout the year.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you so much for hosting this.